like to welcome everyone to Super Smart Women podcast. I'm your host, Karen Medina, and I'm so glad you're joining us today as we talk with yet another super smart woman. If this is your first time joining us, I am so glad you're here. You're in for a real treat. And if you're a regular listener, well, welcome back. I hope that you will subscribe and join us every week where I spend time talking with super smart women who serve, mentor, applaud, reflect, and teach others. And in our time together, you'll get to experience their journey, understand their motivations, and gain some amazing insight about what truly makes a woman smart. Today, I'm talking with super smart woman, Kristi Mayfield. She is founder and CEO of WineWise, which is a wine education platform. Kristi is a certified sommelier who is passionate about helping others learn wine their way. She comes from a career in international business development and sales, where she traveled, sales leadership, where she's traveled all over the world. But she is a teacher at heart, and she loves sharing with others from her knowledge and experience to really help young professionals with tackling corporate networking and events, especially when they're the ones that now have the credit card and have to order the wine. And that's a great episode. So I really encourage everyone to go and check out Everyday Sommelier, her new podcast. Fabulous episodes. And whether you're a new wine drinker or someone who's been drinking wine for a while, there is so much to learn on there. And Kristi, I'm so glad to have you with us today. Most everybody can read that on your LinkedIn profile. So to kick us off, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks so much first of all, for having me on. Yes. So just as you said, I spent a little over 20 years in international business development, sales leadership, primarily in the defense arena. So as you can imagine, a lot of times were breakfast dinners, lunch dinners, dinners. And because a lot of my time was spent in Europe, it is very common, even over a lunch engagement, to have an aperitif, to have a bottle of wine. And so, of course, as the hostess of these engagements, I always received the wine list. And when you're new to wine and you're traveling in Europe, you don't recognize Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, or Riesling on the wine list. It's all about different names because of European labeling. And I got really good at being really creative to try to figure out how to pick the perfect bottle for the dinner. And I learned very early on that doing a little bit of preparation on the front end could help make the dinner or the lunch go way more smoothly. And so over time, these tricks of the trade, as far as entertainment, especially as it related to wine, became part of my DNA. And I love sharing that and teaching that now. But that experience and always being in new wine regions, not that I got to go visit wineries, but just having that exposure to new cultures and new wines, I got so curious that I said, if you don't know about wine and you want to know about wine, go figure it out. So I started doing my own research and then started doing my own certifications. And this past year just finished my WSET level 3, as you mentioned. So it was kind of a self-propagating experience and education, and my nose is always stuck in a wine book.
I was going to say mine's always stuck in a wine glass, but
Well,
that's in
okay.
the evenings. I thought maybe I should have my coffee in a wine glass today, but then I thought I'm still listening to the episode about which wine glass to choose, and obviously you don't drink coffee out of a wine glass, so that wasn't going to work. But
You
yeah,
know what? I'm a big fan. Drink out of whichever glass you want if it makes you happy.
oh, I love listening to your episodes, and I have so many wine stories that are humorous because they're about the fail. And I think that's one of the things I love, that you've taken the experiences that you've had and now you've decided, I'm going to educate others, not
Right.
only, from the perspective of how you got your sommelier, but more from the perspective of if you are out there in this corporate world, be it as a young professional or as a small business owner, that you're going to be in a situation that you may not know what you're doing when it comes to wine.
Mhm.
And having this foundation, I think for a lot would be extremely helpful. I personally am, like I said, I'm loving the episodes because even though I have I have visited Europe. I have learned a lot about.
Right.
There's something new that I'm learning in every episode that you've had, and I love that you're sharing that out there. A lot of people may not even realize that, podcasts are a great source of education. Everybody gets in a car and drives somewhere. Why not listen to a podcast that is going to help you and give you more information that can assist you? Just as a quick, funny story, I remember the first time that I was traveling for business. I wasn't too far out of college. I was in New York. I was the one
Hmm.
with the credit card, and I was a young college graduate from Auburn University. The only wine that I had ever had was Boone's Farm apple wine. I mean, hello, that's what we drank before we were actually allowed to drink. And I didn't know. And the waiter, shows up with the wine list and he says, "Which wine would you like to order? What do you like?" And I went, he said, "Well, do you like, a white or a red?" And I went, "Both." And, but I knew nowhere to go from there. Like, what wine do I like? White wine. I like red wine. And so thus started my journey into figuring out, well, what do I like? And I think that that's kind of at the heart of it. But when we talk about, teaching and and why you came out of a career, a, a few years. I mean, you and I really are just, we started working when we were 5 because we're really
Correct.
young.
Hmm.
But just what made you want to take what you've learned all these years and turn that into a teaching platform? What inspired you?
So when I made a life decision to exit corporate America and do something with wine, I wasn't sure what that was going to be yet, just to be very candid. And I realized that my background was consistently, whatever I was doing in some way, educating or teaching, whether I was selling F-35 fighters in Europe. I was constantly educating people on whether that was the platform or, how that would satisfy allied relationships or industry, all different things. And I felt like I was very good at taking the same information and transferring it into a different message for a different audience. And going back and reflecting on that, I realized, wine is different to every person. I love funky white wines. My husband likes big and bold red wines. Does that mean that we don't share some synergies in our wine journey? Not at all. So, breaking down what I felt I had learned in my career, where I felt I had received like validation that I had some skill, was really in translating complex things into something that anyone could understand and enjoy. And that became the platform for really creating WineWise and making it about not just one group of people, kind of taking it from wine can be super complex, super complicated, and unfortunately often very pretentious. But newbies to wine, they might not even know where to start. They've had one wine that said, "This is really yummy. This is really interesting. This is exciting." So, how do you build off of that and make them feel comfortable and confident and not ashamed that maybe they like a sweet wine?
And
Start
I think,
somewhere.
excuse me, I think that that's one of the characteristics of a teacher that I really want to hone in on, because as we're talking to often a younger audience
Mhm,
that's really figuring out, hey, which pillar am I? I definitely have a passion for giving back to other people, but
mhm.
am I a servant leader? Am I a mentor? Am I,
Right.
a teacher? What am I? Uh, I think those that are teachers are passionate about learning, and
Mhm,
that they're passionate about taking what they've learned and sharing that with other people. And they like taking their experiences.
mhm.
If my experience can help someone else
Correct.
not have the same crash and burn, then I want to share that, with them. I mean, experience is obviously the greatest teacher, but I think the next greatest teacher is a teacher with experience. So and being able to share those experiences. So talk about some of your experiences in your wine journey that have, that crafted your passion and now have turned into very teachable moments for you.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of it comes down to being willing to engage in a conversation. Wine, people love to talk about wine. But again, we can all of a sudden go from a very simple question and take it to a PhD level conversation. And so, really learning to use questions and get people to kind of feel comfortable and, I guess, express things that they're not really sure how to define, but give experiences. So, really translating things to me, like the aha moment is maybe not asking someone, do you like wines that are more citrusy, kind of lemons and green apples, things like that? But do you like something that reminds you of a sunny day on a picnic? Do you like something that's bright and fresh and kind of reminds you of your favorite lemonade or a favorite memory? Or do you like something that makes you feel more like you're wrapped up in a warm blanket in front of a fireplace? Kind of that rich, gives you some warmth and some depth. And when you start translating it in that way, people go, well, I've had those experiences. I might not have had this particular wine, but I've had that experience. And so if you can get people to relate it to something every day, then you can really open their mind and they stop feeling like they have to pick the perfect wine, but they can be open to finding something that gives them those memories, that gives them a refresher of those
That connects to
experiences.
those
And
positive memories. I like
and
that.
wine in general, I mean, you think about it, it is centuries old. And if you look back, you look in the Bible, you look back in philosophy, so many amazing history moments were were created with a glass of wine or a bottle of wine in front of them.
Absolutely.
And it's unlike any other food or beverage that we have in the entire world. And people have great conversations, people create great memories. And I believe in the business world, if you can use that as a vehicle, it's not about drinking a lot and, breaking down people's barriers from the alcohol. It's really about the community that wine creates whenever it's on the table.
Absolutely. So it was interesting. We had foreign exchange
Mhm.
students when my daughter was in both her junior and senior year. And one of the exchange students from her junior year was from Bordeaux.
Oh,
Her family lives in Bordeaux. And one of the things that they sent me an appreciation for hosting their daughter was a half a case of wine from Chateau Brown. And I had never really had an experience with French wines.
mhm,
I like Sauvignon Blanc. I decided I really like Sauvignon
mhm,
Blancs from New England. I like the that crispness that they have. It took me a while. I went through Chardonnays. I went through
mhm.
Pinot
Right.
Grigios, Pinot Gris. Like there was all these different whites, trying everything. And I'd landed on Sauvignon Blanc. But here I am all of a sudden. And I'd had a Cabernet. I'd had a Shiraz. I'd had a few, like major red,
Mhm,
le- I guess brands. You'll correct my language, but I knew those particular flavors, if you
mhm.
would, but I didn't know anything about Chateau Brown. So I'm like, well, I need to know. These people are from Bordeaux. This is wine.
Yeah.
This is as old and beautiful as wine. When you think great wines, Bordeaux just comes into
Mhm,
conversation, right?
mhm,
So I start researching and looking up Chateau Brown, and all of a sudden I'm flooded with all this information, but I am just taken back with wine and that wine region, and it was just amazing to have received this as a gift. But it just kind of opened up my
mhm.
journey into wine, and I've now
Yeah.
become quite the fan. I wouldn't say connoisseur, but quite the fan of a lot of European wines through that introduction. Then we got to go to Bordeaux, and we actually visited one of the chateaus there, which I thought,
Mhm.
what a great name, chateau. It
Right.
sounds like a place you're going to go to the spa, and
Mhm.
that's what they call
It can be
the
just a basic
production
house.
houses
Yeah.
for their
Yeah.
wines. But we went and visited another another chateau, and I brought a case of wine back from there. But the best place I visited in Bordeaux was the museum there, Cité
Mm.
du Vin and City of Wine. And that is actually constructed like a children's museum
Mhm.
because they want from that very young age,
Yes.
and they introduce their children to
Mhm.
wine to know and understand it. And when you were talking about that experience, one of the things in the museum was they actually had these glass globes and different things in the globes, and you put your nose up to this thing and you
Mhm.
smell what's in that globe, and they talk about how that smell is part of a particular type of wine and how you can
Right.
associate that. So
Mhm.
here's one that smells like a library and books, and here's one that smells like cigars, and here's one that smells
Mhm.
citrusy. And I thought, how amazing, here I am over 50, and I'm learning that there's wine isn't just about what's going into my mouth, but it's so much more about how something
Right.
smells and the feelings that it creates. So I love that you talk about that, because for me, a glass of wine for probably, the first 10 years of
Mhm.
drinking any wine was, well, it's not beer, it's wine. And or it's not a glass of Jack and Coke, it's wine. And it
Right.
never really had a distinctive difference to me that it's not just about the flavor of something in the glass, but how it smells, how it makes you feel. And
Mhm.
so when people are thinking about, why should I listen to Everyday Sommelier? Why is learning about this important? What would you tell them? What
Yeah.
would you want them, someone that's like, I don't know anything about wine. Why should I listen to that? I've not really been much of a wine drinker. Why should you listen?
I would say, first of all, we've talked a little bit about the cultural aspects and the historical aspects of wine. I mean, it's been around for centuries. It's you you, you can go back, you know, I'm trying to remember what some of the dates are, but anyway, it's a
Well, you
very
see it in the
historical.
Bible,
Yes,
pre, birth of Christ. Wine
absolutely.
was a part of many of the
And
events.
you go to any museum, any archaeology has some kind of vessel that carried wine or fermented wine. So we know this. And then you also talked about the cultural aspects. I mean, in Europe and in many cultures, wine is just a part of everyday life. And from a very young age, table wine is on every dinner table in that region. And to me, it's while I am a firm believer that we obviously need rules and regulations around alcohol, that is there's no question there. But wine, for example, is it expresses a place. It expresses so much of the terroir, of the climate, of the culture, of the traditions. And that is something you really can't get in a beer, although I would say Belgians might argue with me on that because they do have
Right.
a great beer culture. But the sense of place is so specific to wine. You take 4 bottles, let's say, I'll just use Chardonnay, one from California, one from New Zealand, one from Burgundy in France, and then, one from Northern Italy. They are all going to be, if everything else is the same, the way they're made, the influences in the winery are all the same, they are still going to taste dramatically different. So that is something that a lot of people don't, if you're just new to wine, you might not be thinking as far as something that is part of that experience. But I love getting people to sit side by side, 2 glasses that look identical, but then you taste them and they are so magically different. And, I grew up in Missouri. I'm, I'm a Taurus. So I'm very bound to the earth. And the fact that wine is probably one of the things that pulls so much influence, from the earth, from the place it was grown, through all the way through how it is treated in the vineyard, all the way through every single piece and touch point in the winery. And then it even continues to morph and change in the bottle. It's an organic being. It is something that will never be the same. It will never stay constant. and you can never learn everything there is. So for me, as a lifelong learner, I find it so engaging because even when I take a certification course, or even when I take a course on a specific topic or read a book, I know there's always something new, because each harvest, each season, there's going to be a new winery. There's going to be a new climate. Mother Nature's going to rear her ugly head, or she's going to be nice and kind and gentle. And so there's always something new to learn. And I think that's one thing, that if you are somebody who's passionate about thinking beyond just the glass as being a glass of wine, there's so many elements that you can dive into and explore.
One of the things that one of the words you used earlier was not a word I was familiar with until I went to the museum, the terroir.
Yeah.
And in a nutshell, it's the dirt, it's the ground, it's the
It's
area, the
actually a whole
region.
ecosystem.
Right.
It's, yeah.
And I hadn't thought about that either, but they have a whole presentation there on the different regions and how elevation affects
hmm
things,
hmm
how moisture and climate. And you have a really good episode on that talks about how a glass, even from the same winery, the same name, that from one year to the next,
hmm
will taste very different.
Correct.
And unless you're talking about the big bottle wineries that
hmm
work very hard to make sure everything stays very
Yeah.
same and very consistent, which are the ones that I ordered because I knew what I was getting there for a while. But just taking all that into consideration, and you're right, lifelong learners often want to know more about. They always ask why. And
hmm
so for someone that's listening today that goes, hey, I'm one of those people that's always asking, but why? Why is that so?
hmm
Why does you may be a teacher, because if you're always curious, it's likely that you have that thirst for knowledge and probably a willingness to share that. So how did you get started going from getting your sommelier, sommelier? I know it's different ways that people
That's
say
okay.
it. It's a very interesting word. I think the first few times I saw it, I said sommelier because that's Southern grammar. That's how we're going to pronounce things. Sommelier or sommelier. Either one
Mm,
I've heard is correct. But if you got your sommelier, what made you then say, now I want to turn this into an educational platform, which is what WineWise is.
mhm,
It's actually a series of courses that you can take to bolster your own, personal
mhm.
knowledge about wine. What when did that
When did that click?
light bulb
Yeah.
go on, right?
Well, so first of all, there's what I want to make sure everyone understands is there's kind of three different types of learners in wine. One is if you need it for your business. So kind of wine as a power skill and, and client entertainment, that sort of thing. So business professionals, service industry professionals. I mean, after COVID, we've had a whole new, so much turnover in the service industry. And there is a thirst for knowledge to be really good and really successful at your career in service. So if you're working for an entity, a restaurant, a wine bar, and wine is on your menu, then WineWise can be a fabulous resource. That's my goal. And then wine enthusiasts, wine lovers. I mean, so again, taking the fear out of wine, creating confidence, and really allowing people to understand what they like and then how to translate that easily into a conversation. So if you have service industry professionals and enthusiasts talking the same language, then you're going to have great experiences. But from that perspective, it's, there's one, it's really about creating a community. I mean, wine creates a community. And my goal with WineWise is to build this amazing community of wine lovers who will share openly, who will, oh, I found this new wine. Or has anybody been to Hudson Valley? Do you have any recommendations? Or I'm trying to learn a little bit more about this. Where's a great resource? So creating a community with no judgment. No judgment allowed. And so I have a Facebook group, Everyday Sommelier Wine Pod. I'm creating a Slack community for people to just openly chat about wine and share their experiences. And of course, I want that same kind of communication in the classes. The second part is to create that level of confidence, whether it's a wine lover or somebody in the service industry, to feel confident. You don't have to just know information. It's almost as important to be able to ask the right questions. So building
And to have a
confidence.
place to ask those
Yeah.
questions too,
And no fear, no
judgment free.
judgment. Right. And then the third thing is in the US and really globally, we are seeing a decline in wine sales. The wine industry is, we're growing as far as the number of wineries, people entering the industry, but wine sales are declining. And I think a lot of that is because we have made it seem often fearful and a little too pretentious and unattainable. Very complex, very, very much a luxury product. When, wine, you walk into a grocery store in Europe and you can buy wine in the same jug you buy your gallon of milk. It shouldn't be that way. Yes, there are premium wines that should be revered and treated differently. But my goal is to really just re-engage people around wine and the fact that wine does bring people together to have great friendships or family experiences, business conversations, etc. So those are really the three principles behind it: creating a community, taking the fear out and giving people confidence, and then the third vein of just really taking wine from an industry perspective and rebuilding it as is something that we all need to support. One, winemakers are some of the hardest working people in the world, especially when they own their own vineyards and really follow that grape from a stick of wood in the winter to a beautiful bottle of wine. So those are the three principles upon which I feel passionate in my business.
I think passion is probably too one of those
Yeah.
keywords. Because it's quite an endeavor to take on writing courses, doing the podcast, and all of this is as your own business. There's not some wine company that has bottler that has said, "Hey, Kristi, will you do this for
Right.
us?" This
Yeah,
is
I don't have a
your
sponsor.
passion. Maybe you will as WineWise launches, but at the same time, I know you, and I know you're going to remain impartial. You're not going to be pushing any particular
Right.
wine on the group. But it has gotten very intimidating to walk into a wine store or a liquor store and you're
Mhm.
looking at racks and racks and racks of wine, and you're alone. I mean, you're not even at looking at a wine list at a restaurant where there's
Mhm.
people staring at you going, "Is what are we going to order for dinner?" You're there and you're like, "I just want to pick out a bottle of wine." And for me, it's usually, I want to try something new. I want to try
Mhm.
something different. And you just don't know where to start. And so I think there's a lot that anyone that would listen to the podcast, take your courses, would gather so much information and insight to remove the intimidation
Mhm.
from those types of events. The intimidation of, I don't know what to buy in a
Mhm.
store, the intimidation of, and it comes from being, yes, maybe a little pretentious. Maybe there's one too many waiters who have looked down the nose at someone like, "Oh, you don't
Yeah.
know what to want." Well, waiters, stop doing that, and let's help those that are trying to order. But if you found yourself before in that position, then I would highly encourage you to go and listen to Kristi's, podcast, consider the courses that she's offering, because it can really take that intimidation out and help you start on something other than a blank page. There
Yeah.
was nothing more intimidating for me in school than for the teacher to say, "Take out a blank piece of paper."
Oh,
It's like,
right.
but blank, you know, now I'm like, when I was teaching classes that were for younger students, I would say, "Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have like 10 pieces of paper. Go ahead and write your name in the top corner and go ahead and number 1 through 10. This is before tests were even, like, we're going to do this on like 4 or 5." And then I would say, "This is for spelling tests. So just write spelling test across the top." Or I would give them a photocopied page that had name and a line, and 1 through
Mhm.
10 was already there, because then it's not a blank
Yes,
piece
that
of
blank page.
paper
Mhm.
that scares people.
Mhm.
Having a blank slate means I have to start from nothing. And so
Correct.
listening to a podcast, attending a class, you're not starting from nothing. You're at least going to be able to say, okay, this particular episode talked about, how to find your flavor of white that you want to try. So now I can at least go to the whites and go, hey, this one was mentioned, or this type was mentioned.
Hmm.
Let
Hmm.
me start there, and then, try something that you like.
Right.
The other thing I think that's intimidating about wine has been wine prices,
Mm.
and that
Hmm. Yeah.
you're only going to get a good bottle of wine if you spend $20 or more, that the lower priced are not as good.
You'll
Well,
love next week's
my
episode.
favorite red wine you can get at Trader Joe's. It's called 1967, and I think it's like $6 or $7 a bottle.
Mhm.
And I don't know how I know how I stumbled on it, because that was the year that I was born. And
Okay.
someone thought it would be really cute to bring me this bottle that
I
they
love
saw
that.
at Trader Joe's that said 1967 as a present for my birthday. And when we opened it and tried it, I was like,
This
wow,
is really good.
this is really good. And the fact that it was called 1967, it was like, and it's my birth year, which was
Mhm.
must have been a great year for wine, right? So, and I think that's how, some things start to happen, but just taking that those
Right.
various intimidation factors out of choosing a wine, enjoying a wine, and sharing a wine. Cause then, it's like, I've got to buy it, but now I want to give a gift
Yeah.
and I don't know what their favorite is. So
Right.
there's that whole aspect of,
Mhm.
how do I pick a wine to give somebody as a gift? So there are so many things that I
Right.
know you're going to teach and share. And I love the idea of community.
Mhm.
But I think we could you and I think I love wine as much as you do, and would sit here and, as like the child at your foot to learn for probably the next 4 hours. I'll do that on the podcast, but I want to close out with our audience with a couple of questions that I always like to
Okay.
ask. As you look back over, your career, I know you've had a lot of milestones. Talk about some of your proudest milestones when it comes to kind of this teaching journey that you've been
Mhm.
on.
Now, I think probably the biggest milestone, and it's still, I'm just going to be very candid, it's still a little scary, was making the decision to leave a long, very comfortable and successful career to pursue something that I just like had this fire inside me to do. So really that milestone, and having my husband's support to say, like, literally take me by the shoulders, you love wine, go do something
Go
about
do
it.
something.
Um, and so, that's something I would say, regardless of whether it's wine or it's, whatever it is in your life, sometimes the most scary moments are the most pivotal moments in your life. And so don't be afraid of those, because inevitably you probably do have something very secure to fall back on. But for me, coming to that realization that I didn't want to wake up a year later and wish I would have done something different was, that was scarier than actually going out and doing something about it. So I think that was kind of the biggest milestone. I mean, I could talk about sales successes or, career successes and things like that. But personally, for me, that was it. But also, just in my own personal development journey, which I decided when I was going to go out on my own, I needed to spend as much time on me as a person and not just about what my wine business was going to be about. And really just learning to let go of I'm type triple A plus. I like everything to be just perfectly planned, perfectly executed. And what I've realized is that if I just let me be me, that authenticity is way more relatable than any type of perfection. And then I translate that to wine, and it's like, you know, if you pick a bottle and you don't like it, it's just as important to know why you didn't like it than it is to find that perfect bottle that you love. So learning about me personally, and some of the things that I've, just had to uncover and peel back the onion on my own personality and my own self. I think that's also been kind of a learning moment in that I chose to go on with this journey, as well as launching WineWise and Everyday Sommelier.
I think what you just said is an incredible piece of advice, whether it's wine or anything else. We we definitely want to focus on why we like something,
Mhm.
but it is important to know why you
Why you
didn't
don't.
like something, why you don't like the boss that you have right now, why you
Right.
don't like the particular task that you're doing at work, why you
Mhm.
don't like a particular wine, because you can learn as much in those
Yes.
moments. My son has talked before about not liking the person that he's worked for, or a
Mhm.
teacher that he
Mhm.
has at school. I'm like, why don't you like? I don't know, I just don't like them. Well, no,
Yeah.
let's actually pick that apart, because when you get to choose next time, and there's a lot of
Right.
ways now people can choose instructors when they're taking classes. It's like, don't just look for the qualities that you like, but look for the qualities that you don't like, and make sure you're choosing, in that type of decision, or any decision. And when you have to put yourself in those shoes, now I'm going to be a boss. Now I'm going to be a
Mhm.
teacher. What did I not like about
Right.
teachers? Make sure that I don't have that
Right.
characteristic coming out in my classroom or in my employment situation. So that,
Mhm.
I'm glad you honed in on that, because I don't think I've talked about that on
Yeah.
any other episode. Just, before we close out, I always like to know resources that you use, think people that you follow, podcasts, books that you've read.
Mhm.
I want to share those with our audience, and anything that you share, as well as a link to your podcast and WineWise, I'm going
Okay.
to put in the description. But share what some of your resources that have really helped you.
Oh gosh. Well, I've done both the formal certification through Wine and Spirit Education Trust. And so there is an episode, episode 8 with Jenny Hemmer. She's the executive director of Guild Somm, and she really walks people through what those formal programs look like. But I also have a library of books that I go back to constantly to fact check and to just remind myself of certain things, because it's so complex and it's so big. And, every once in a while you're like, no, do I remember that correctly? And so authors like Kevin Zraly and Karen McNeil are fabulous. But I will say they can be very, very intimidating because they're thick books, and they're very there is a lot of complexity in the language they use. Has a lot of complexity in the language, just like sommelier. There's a lot of French words, so that is the case. I have a new book called Wine Confident with Kelly White that I just think is a great. I bought it because it's like I love to also refresh my language and make sure I'm keeping it everyday sommelier language and not getting too complex in my own. And then there's a lot of other great podcasts out there on wine and food. But I think for me, just, John Maxwell, how to live my today, how to wake up each morning with purpose and intention is every bit as important as diving into the subject matter that I teach and continuing to keep myself educated there. Is just really keeping, very grounded in who I am and how I'm serving others and what I do. It's not about me. I'm so passionate when people go, I finally understand. I've been trying to understand that for 2 years, and now I think I get it. And those are the best moments ever. So really keeping an eye out on how you're serving others.
I will definitely put links to all of those in the description, because one of the things I love is that every super smart woman that I talk with has people that influence them.
Mhm.
And that's a lifelong skill that everyone needs to continue to
Mhm.
work on, is that you never stop working on yourself.
Right.
And so having those uh, books, having those authors, having those podcasts to follow is just one way to continue to, to pour into yourself, and to increase your own knowledge, to regulate.
Yeah.
Am I on the right path? Am I doing what I'm supposed to? Am I inspiring
Mhm.
myself? So I'm happy to share those. Kristi, thank you so
Thank you,
much for being
Karen.
here. You and I are going to sit down and actually enjoy a glass of wine
I'm
here real
holding you
soon.
to that.
And it's going to be one that you're going to recommend that I've probably never had before, because I'm going to learn something new. And I love that. I want to
Fantastic.
thank our audience for joining us. If you haven't, please subscribe to the Super Smart Women podcast, and be sure to join us each week as I talk with more super smart women.